Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. A Vancouver man is among those killed by Hamas militants in Israel.
Just gutted to hear this news. Ben was a much loved member of our community.
While some Palestinians here plead for Ottawa to get their children out of harm's way.
If they can do any process for them to take him out from Gaza as soon as possible.
Plus, vaccination push.
We have a lot of people that are pre-booked.
British Columbians are urged to get their flu and COVID vaccines as respiratory sicknesses rise. And help from afar.
This is the fourth deployment from South Africa.
South African firefighters share their memories helping battle BC's brutal wildfires.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Israeli warplanes reduced buildings to rubble and sent people in the Gaza Strip scrambling for safety today as Israel steps up airstrikes on day 4 of its conflict with Hamas. It's in retaliation for a surprise and deadly attack by Hamas militants on Saturday. That multi-pronged assault marks the single deadliest day ever for Israel. More than 1,000 Israelis and almost 900 Palestinians have been killed. Israel says it's finally secured its border with Gaza. The territory is now under a total siege by Israel with a blockade of food, water, fuel, and medicine. Meanwhile, rockets continue to rain down on Israeli cities from the territory. A Vancouver man, a family and a community are grieving after learning a local man is among the hundreds killed in Israel. As Leanne Young tells us, 23-year-old Ben Mizrahi was attending a music festival when Hamas militants attacked.
A somber scene at Vancouver's King David High School. They're remembering one of their own.
Just gutted to hear this news. Ben was a much loved member of our community. He was a big brother to his siblings. He was very well liked by all his teachers.
Messages of support cover the walls. Ben Mizrahi was killed in Israel over the weekend. He graduated in 2018.
Involved in absolutely everything. If you look at any of our yearbooks, while Ben was here, he's pretty much on every page. He loved to do everything, and he was kind, really loved to help people, and he really loved Israel.
That connection prompted him to move there after high school. But sadly, the 22-year-old's life was cut short. Over the weekend, Hamas militants attacked while he was at a music festival in southern Israel.
We learned Saturday that he was missing. We were all hoping for the best, that he'd be found alive and safe.
Mizrahi was killed along with hundreds of other young people. Chaplarosh is still in shock. His friend since high school is gone.
He was full of life. That's kind of the one thing I remember about him is just, he was always smiling. He was always laughing.
Always up for an adventure. A talented basketball player and a big brother to 3 siblings. Friends say Ben and his family have deep roots here.
The Vancouver Jewish community is a very tight-knit community. It's very painful. We feel this loss very deeply.
This neighbor, who's also a rabbi, held vigil with Ben's parents just before they flew to Israel to search for him.
There's a state of shock. In fact, there's not something that you can't really speak about it even. There's just silence. The pit of worry brings about silence.
Infeld says before Mizrahi's passing, his family heard he was using his skills as a military medic to help others. Since then, there's been an outpouring of support.
I just want to send out a message to Mr. Mizrahi's family and friends that we stand with them, and we stand with Israel in the face of these awful attacks. And it is profoundly disturbing to all of us, and we're grieving with them today.
The Mizrahi family are preparing now for Ben's funeral, scheduled for tomorrow. Leanne Young, CBC News, Vancouver.
Palestinians who stand against Hamas are also concerned about their safety. Mohammed Fayed moved to Canada as a political refugee about 1.5 years ago. He had to leave his 2 children behind.
I can't control myself. I'm dad, so as I dad, I am very concerned about their safety. And I am very worried and fear that I'm going to lose them at any moment. And I wish my voice can reach to IRCC or government in Canada in order to just make anything for my kids, just to make sure they're still alive and make sure that if they can do any process for them to take him out from Gaza as soon as possible.
Ottawa has said it will start airlifting Canadians out of Israel via Tel Aviv in the coming days. The flights will be for Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and their immediate families. The Foreign Affairs Minister says they're working on other options for people who cannot get to the airport. Let's take a larger look at what's happening right now. Israel's military has revealed disturbing new information about the attack by Hamas in one community. Chris Brown is in southern Israel reporting on day 4 of the Israel-Hamas conflict. And a warning for you, some of the images and descriptions in this story are disturbing.
As Israel continues to count its dead from Hamas's surprise attack, its military is revealing some of the horrific ways people died. This is Kfar Aza, where the bloated bodies of Hamas gunmen still lie in the open.
You see the babies, the mother, the fathers in the bedrooms, in the protection rooms, and how the terrorists kill them. It's not a war, it's a massacre.
Some images are just too awful to show, with blood everywhere. Dozens of Hamas militants stormed in, killing the guards, burning homes and butchering entire families, say Israeli soldiers. Remains are only now being removed because the last gunmen were only killed a few hours before this visit. On that awful day, medic Shalom Abitan was sent to Kfar Aza as a first responder. He didn't realize he was arriving at a massacre and was further stunned to be handed one of 2 babies.
They were screaming, they were dehydrated. The soldier told me that the parents are not with them anymore. They were all captured or they were killed. Until then, we were dealing with people without any hands and shot in terrible conditions. It was suddenly you're getting a baby, a small baby, and you feel that you can give him the feeling of being safe.
Hamas's inhumanity is also now visible from the dash cam footage of people shot in their cars that morning, their vehicles coasting to a stop with the drivers dead inside. Another barrage of rockets was launched from Gaza Tuesday, striking targets in Israel's south, where people are preparing for what they expect will be a long war. We visited Negba, where we met Nofar Melek Shalom, a pregnant mother of 2 and a Canadian from London, Ontario.
We stay with our friends in their safe room.
Because why?
Just scared of sleeping in our house right now because there are still terrorists walking around and they don't know where all of them are yet.
This kibbutz, a communal settlement, is designed to be self-sufficient. Hen Levran on the security team said if there is a ground war with more Hamas incursions, he will be ready.
We have a perimeter defense system here with armed guys like me ready. We got, look towers and watch towers. We have communications. We have a war room. We have duct.
Chris Brown reporting from southern Israel tonight. Back in this province, local Jewish groups are holding a vigil tonight for those killed in Israel. The CBC's Liam Britton is at Jackpool Plaza in downtown Vancouver, where people are gathering. Liam, we've heard some of the people speaking. What have they shared?
Well, speaking with these people, what they're talking about is that this attack feels different. It's so horrifying and shocking. People didn't believe it was real at first. And, as people process it, they're thinking about their friends, their family back in Israel. Spoke to some people who are from Israel or have visited Israel. I spoke with Ezra Shankin. He's one of the organizers of today's event. He's with the Jewish Federation of Greater Vancouver.
So it's not uncommon for us to have people here that are deeply connected to people over there. And one of the things that we've been observing over these last few days is just how interconnected folks are here and how much pain there is within our community.
So yeah, the pain, the horror, the shock, people talking about their mental health and how they will come to grips with what has happened over the last few days and coming together for each other here in Vancouver.
Liam, beyond what we heard from Ezra Shankin, what do organizers want the broader community to know? Do they have a message?
Well, they have a message that they're trying to be here for each other. Israel is so far away that people do feel a little bit helpless. But, you know, just look at this crowd. We're looking at several hundred people behind me here. People have come as far away from Vancouver Island, all across the Lower Mainland. You know, there's a lot of fear in this community, but they're trying to be strong for each other. Not just fear about what's happened, but what may still happen as this conflict drags on, Dan.
The CBC's Liam Britton reporting live from Jackpool Plaza tonight. Thank you, Liam. To other news now, BC has become the first province to sign a new healthcare deal with the federal government. This includes more than $1 billion in extra funding. But as Bureau Baines explains, smaller communities are hoping for more as they face regular ER closures.
It's official. BC's bilateral deal on healthcare with Ottawa adds $1.2 billion in funding over the next 3 years. It's the first deal signed with provinces and territories after an increase in federal health transfers.
This historic support includes $25 billion to provinces and territories for tailored plans that will focus on the unique needs of people in each province and territory.
In March, the province reached a deal with the federal government after a big push for money during the pandemic. Provinces and territories get a 5% annual hike to the federal health transfers for the next 5 years. BC has been under pressure because of severe shortages of doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers in hospitals and family practices.
The largest share of the money under this agreement will go to support nurses, particularly nurses in acute care. So that's $200, $250, and $300 million in each of the next 3 years of the agreement. That's $750 over 3, and that's the majority of the funds in the agreement.
Some of the $1.2 billion is also earmarked for mental health and addictions treatment.
What do we want?
Still, rallies have been held across BC for more healthcare dollars as rural communities endure repeated emergency room closures. The mayor of Merritt says they need a lot more help and planning.
This is 15 times we've been down in 10 months. And on this weekend, New Denver, Oliver, Kermias, and Merritt were all down at the same time. And that's consistently happening over and over again.
He says the city shouldn't have to pay tax dollars for the days when their ER was closed. Other provinces and territories are expected to sign new deals with Ottawa in the coming days. The only province without one is Quebec. Bureau Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
Still on the health front, BC officially has launched its fall immunization campaign. Updated COVID and influenza vaccines are now available to you. As Michelle Gassoub shows us, with cases of respiratory illness rising, doctors are calling all those eligible to get jabbed.
COVID and flu vaccines have landed in BC pharmacies. Already, pharmacists have had a busy day with appointments.
We have a lot of people that are pre-booked, so we're taking pre-bookings for COVID only.
With cases of respiratory illnesses on the rise, BC has ordered 2.8 million doses of the updated COVID-19 vaccines and 2.3 million doses of the new influenza or flu vaccine.
Individuals want to get both vaccines at the same time. That's completely safe. We just usually put them in 2 separate arms just to avoid having a really sore arm. But the immune system response is still going to be as robust.
Influenza vaccines are available by appointment or to drop-ins. For COVID shots, you'll need to wait for a text or email invitation from the province. Currently, elderly people and healthcare workers are being prioritized for those.
Today, across British Columbia, 30,000 people have made appointments.
Even if you've had COVID before and been vaccinated against it, it's recommended you get a booster. The virus mutates slowly over months, and this updated COVID vaccine targets the latest Omicron subvariant.
The virus changes enough over several months where that changes collectively come to the point where your immune system isn't able to actually respond in a strong, robust way.
If you've had a recent COVID infection, it's recommended you wait 1 to 3 months before getting a booster, though you're still encouraged to get vaccinated against the flu. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
BC service providers say there are not enough places for people in this province to safely use drugs. This comes after the provincial government proposed legislation that would ban drug use in many more public spaces. More now from Yasmin Khanea.
So we've got shelter room A here.
Vancouver's Union Gospel Mission supports people who are homeless, some of whom also struggle with addiction.
Homelessness and addiction might not be one and the same, but they are often related. And if we want to see any meaningful, tangible change in anyone's lives, we need to work together and build a strong pathway.
The organization says the province's public drug use bill could force people who are unhoused to use drugs in unsafe environments. If passed, the law would ban illicit drug use within 6 meters of all building entrances and bus stops and in parks, beaches, and sports fields.
We know that drug users who use alone are the most likely to die, so we don't want them using alone.
UGM is among the many voices saying more needs to be done to help people escape homelessness.
We need more housing that isn't just like a random place where people can lay their heads, but a place that actually has wraparound support.
Service providers are also questioning where drug users are supposed to go when they say there aren't enough overdose prevention sites. Vancouver has a dozen, but northern BC only has a handful. One of the 2 sites in Prince George started limiting its hours last month, closing 3 days a week because of a lack of funding.
We were open in the mornings, in the afternoons, and now we're only open in the afternoon, so people can't come in and use. And it also, we lose connection with those people being closed for those days. It literally just comes down to funding. Like, we have people that are willing and like dying, literally dying to do this work.
The provincial government says it introduced the drug use bill in the name of safety, adding that it will work with communities to expand resources for treatment. Yasmin Ghanaya, CBC News, Vancouver.
Despite more rain and slightly cooler temperatures, our wildfire season is not over yet. A new blaze broke out on Sunday about 6 kilometers southeast of Chetwynd. The BC Wildfire Service says the Mount Whartonby fire has grown to 7 square kilometers. An evacuation alert is in place for properties near Highway 97. Wildfire crews, along with heavy equipment and helicopters, are there. The fire is thought to have been sparked by lightning. 323 active wildfires are burning across our province. Meanwhile, about 200 South African firefighters who helped fight those blazes are now back home. They were deployed at the end of August as part of a larger contingent of more than 800. The BC Wildfire Service released this video of South Africans reflecting on their experience here.
This is the 4th deployment from South Africa to come and assist Canada. The first 3 deployments, they assisted mostly in Alberta, and the 4th one now has moved up to British Columbia.
And what I learned about British Columbia, you will find out sometimes it will be rainy. Back in South Africa, we know that when it's raining, we know that the fire is going to run out. But here, can be able to wear the raincoat to go to the fires, and then we still find the hotspot.
Remember, back in South Africa, our fires, the conditions are not the same, are slightly different. So to speak of the ash pits, so to speak of when we are fighting fires, we have to dig at some point and to find the hotspot. But in South Africa, it's just the fires that are running on top of the surface.
Give us the morale.
Darius Madavi joins us now with the first look at the weather, and we certainly are grateful for the hundreds of people from across the world, really, from South Africa, Australia, and elsewhere that came here to fight those fires.
It was great to see. It was one nice part of what was otherwise a really bleak fire season. And before that, we saw new fire breaking out, or at least really growing. And a good reminder that the fire season is not over yet, even though we're getting into what would usually be a ramping down, given the drought situation still prevalent across the province and the lack of rain we've been having the last few months. It's still very much at risk of more fires being sparked and continuing to grow. We did start to continue to see some more rain across the province over the last 24 hours, but that looks like it'll probably be more or less the last of it, a little bit more streaming its way up the coast and maybe breaking into the interior tomorrow morning, but really that's going to be it. By tomorrow afternoon, we're clearing up across most of the province. Here you can see that accumulation over the next 24 hours. And then if we look beyond that into the 48-hour mark, really not much else makes its way here in BC except in the northwest at the end of that 48-hour period. So we're really heading into another clearing trend for the end of this week, although by the time we get into the weekend, some more rain will make its way to the province. So here's just a general look at that precipitation. Really briefly tonight and tomorrow morning, we see a little bit more, and then it's not until Friday that we see another system start to make its way through and just making it to the coast by late on Friday. So by this weekend, we should start to see some more of that rain here on the coast. But for tonight, just expect a little bit more showers overnight and then clearing up for tomorrow morning.
Okay. Thanks very much, Darius.
Thanks, Dan.
After the break, we look into the long history that has led to the Israeli-Hamas conflict. More on the context after this. And hello to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream. Thanks for being here. BC has more than doubled its previous record for area burned during a single wildfire season. With climate change fueling more extreme weather, destructive summers like this year's are expected to be more common in the future. And as Janella Hamilton reports, that as the province's independent forest watchdog calling for radical action.
Feel the heat? More than 3 million hectares of land has been scorched in 2023, a huge jump from BC's previous record set during the 2018 wildfire season.
Oh my God, that is roaring.
This year's unprecedented wildfire season is reigniting calls to spend more time and money on mitigation work. BC's Forest Practices Board is calling for measures to proactively protect the interface around communities and beyond.
Around 38 million hectares of land is at high risk of wildfire.
Wildfire experts say decades of zealous fire suppression tactics have left much of BC's landscape littered with vegetation. In June, the board gave the government a list of recommendations to change how the province's land is managed.
There's a significant situation in front of us, so we're hoping there'll be some strong, bold moves.
Measures that include thinning forests, encouraging the growth of more fire-resistant tree species, creating fuel breaks, and more frequent prescribed and Indigenous cultural burning.
After timber harvesting or in an area where there's clearing, you would, on purpose, light a fire and remove all the understory, the grass that would burn the debris that's building up.
Not only are lives, homes, human health, and livelihoods at risk, but fighting these kinds of fires also comes with a heavy price tag. So far this year in BC, upwards of $1 billion.
What could we have accomplished if we used that same amount of money proactively? We're spending the money on the wrong end of the problem.
It's a tough sell to spend money up front for something that hasn't happened yet.
Her group will be releasing a report in the coming days, making a number of their own recommendations.
There is a guarded optimism out there that the task force at hand and that this season that we've just had will be sort of the leveraging point for true transformative change across the province.
That climate task force announced by the Premier a month ago will look at lessons learned from the past and best practices for the future, but so far with no timeline attached. Janella Hamilton, CBC News, Vancouver.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has lasted for decades, both sides fighting for control of land, among other things, often resulting in death and violence. But for many here in Canada, it can be difficult to understand the nuance of this situation. For more, we're joined by Adil Iskander. He is an associate professor of global communication at Simon Fraser University. Adil, of course, more than 70 years of Palestinian and Israeli conflict in this region, a very hard issue. But how, first of all, did we end up, do you think, at this weekend's deadly attacks and Israel's declaration of war against Hamas?
Well, the declaration of war against Hamas is just the latest iteration of a fairly long-standing situation between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Unfortunately, Gaza has been under a 17-year siege, which is an extremely long time. 2.2 million people living in fairly unsustainable circumstances, and that has bred a tremendous amount of discontent and anger. Many of them have been subjected to repeated attacks by Israel and conflict. And of course, many of the inhabitants of Gaza, I think most of your listeners may not know this already, are actually original indigenous communities from the areas across the border in Israel. So this has become, Gaza Strip has become a bit of an open air prison for a lot of the people who were displaced from southern areas that are now Israel. And so the disgruntlement is continuous. And of course, they're ruled and governed by Hamas. It has its own sort of radical ideological perspective. But as a resistance movement, it's gained a lot of support precisely because it stands up to Israel's repeated attacks. On October 7th, we have a significant escalation on the part of Hamas. But of course, it is in response to the conditions that exist inside Gaza that are basically the product of a complete closure of the strip on the part of both the Israelis and the Egyptians. This is a very, very difficult situation to describe. And of course, now being exacerbated by a very, 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 really kind of an outrageous response. Of course, I know that the attacks against Israelis, both civilians and military, were very jarring and very brazen and deeply heartbreaking. But the response has been really quite disproportionate in some regards. So we can get into that if you want. But
during times of crisis, we know misinformation can often run rampant. What is the danger here, perhaps, when onlookers are trying to separate fact, fiction, and versions of truth that appear?
Well, the reality is that both sides are using the media as instruments for the advocacy of their own perspectives. And of course, they have every reason to, because this is existential for both communities. But nevertheless, news verification is really, really critical. It's easy for us to get sucked into these respective kind of spirals where, we hear stories that are, remarkably outrageous. But it is important to note that there is a disproportionality in this regard. Yes, there was a substantial attack in Israel. The cost of life was really, really substantial in comparison to other Hamas attacks. But starting, looking at the numbers today, things have swung in the other direction quite substantially. Now we have about 260 children in Gaza who've been killed by Israeli bombardment, over 990 Palestinians killed, 10 medical centers destroyed, 48 schools, and almost 22,000 homes reduced to rubble. And this disproportionality is part of what has been the case for the last 17 years on the part of Palestinians living in Gaza.
Adil, if I can just jump in, we're running a little short for time. We appreciate your time. Do you see any way out of this conflict that could lessen the deadly impact on civilians, particularly on both sides, whether it's an international force, whether it's Egypt opening its border with Gaza? Is there a way out of this, do you think?
I think the only way forward to a cessation of violence is a rational discussion about a long-term solution for both Gaza and Palestinians that allow them to live outside of occupation so they can live at peace together, side by side, or in the same land for that matter. But this arrangement of complete enclosure and siege is unsustainable and inevitably will continue to reproduce these kinds of violent attacks.
Adil Iskander, an associate professor of global communication at Simon Fraser University. Thanks for your time and your perspective today.
Thank you so much.
In the U.S., there is confirmation that several Americans are being held hostage by Hamas, and at least 20 citizens are still missing in Israel. That as President Joe Biden reaffirms his commitment to provide the weapons needed to fight back. Katie Simpson now with just how far the United States says it is willing to go.
The U.S. president looked distraught and sounded angry, delivering his strongest condemnation of the violence yet.
We must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel.
Going into graphic detail, Joe Biden argued Israel has a duty to respond to the brutal attack.
This was an act of sheer evil.
Biden announced additional U.S. military support, including ammunition to replenish Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system, with the first plane load already on the ground. While back in Washington, focus remained on rescuing American captives. 23-year-old Hirsch Goldberg-Polin is among the missing. His mother sharing the heartbreaking details of their last text message exchange.
It said, "I'm sorry." And I took it to mean, I love you and I'm sorry because whatever is going to happen is going to cause you tremendous pain and worry.
U.S. warships have now started arriving in the eastern Mediterranean, though their presence is concerning at least one NATO ally. What business does America's aircraft carrier have in Israel? What is it coming to do? Asked the Turkish president. It's going to hit all of Gaza, he said, and commit very serious massacres. But the U.S. National Security Advisor says the ships are about containing the conflict.
To send a clear message of deterrence to other states or non-state actors that might seek to widen this war.
Echoing the president, Jake Sullivan vowed unwavering support for Israel, making no public demands of restraint.
And I'm not here to draw red lines or issue warnings or give lectures to anybody.
The White House will ask Congress to prioritize additional spending packages for Israel. That can't happen until a new House Speaker is elected, which lawmakers hope is finally sorted out before the week is over. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Coming up, the NHL updates its uniform policy, and that now includes a ban on using pride tape on ice. We'll tell you why after this.
The future of the biggest ranch in North America is in jeopardy. That's the Gang Ranch near Williams Lake in British Columbia. The BC government says there are too few cowboys riding herd on too many cattle. The result, it says, is severe overgrazing and damage to Crown land. It wants to cut back on the herd, but the owner wants to expand. Jerry Thompson explains the dilemma.
Just under 1 million acres, bigger than any single ranch in Alberta, bigger even than the King Ranch in Texas. But size is deceptive. Almost all this vast territory is Crown land, leased to Gang Ranch for grazing. And because it is Crown land, there are special rules about how the work is done. For instance, four-wheel drive vehicles are not allowed. This is one of the last places in the world where they still round up cattle the same way they did 100 years ago, with cowboys on horseback. And that may be one of the prime reasons why the Gang Ranch is having such a problem. These days, it's hard to find enough cowboys who know how to do this.
It's a dying breed. The true professional cowboys are very hard to come by. And to get the true professional cowboy who is 12 months out of the year, that's his career, and always will be his career, those people are hard to find, and they're getting fewer and fewer.
Until the cattle are brought down from the hills for winter, they run wild up here, eating the same grass that the deer, moose, and mountain goats eat. And according to the Forest Service, the cattle are eating way too much of it.
The problem with Gang Ranch was that he didn't disperse enough cowboys into the backcountry to move the cattle around so that they would only eat 50% of the grass that was there.
There are ranches with far more cattle than this. In fact, the Douglas Lake Ranch south of here runs 6 or 8 times as many cattle per acre of land. But that's because they own the land, fence it off, and irrigate it. Gang Ranch is one of the last big Old West cattle operations that doesn't want to be fenced in.
One of the problems that ranches are facing today and have for years is the encroaching involvement of government. If it keeps going, cattle ranching as we know it here may be a dying trade in the future.
Even with high interest rates and sagging beef prices, Al Sager is, like a lot of cattlemen, a stubborn optimist. He's asked permission to try again next spring with 1,000 extra cows in the wilderness. But if the government says no, that may be the end. Jerry Thompson, CBC News, on the Gang Ranch.
The NHL is banning the use of pride tape and other themed tape for its players on ice. That change is part of its updated uniform policy. It prohibited themed jerseys for warm-ups in June after a handful of players opted out of pride jerseys last season. Cameron McIntosh explains.
A symbol of inclusivity now benched, it appears, for good. Rainbow-colored stick tape, pride tape.
Very disappointing to hear this news coming from the NHL.
Chris Wells is co-founder of Pride Tape. Invented, he says, to promote inclusion. It was used on occasion on all 32 NHL teams.
It's never been forced. It's just been available for players to signal their support without having to say any words.
Pride Tape was first used by the Edmonton Oilers and counts the game's biggest name among its advocates.
Is it something that I'd like to see put back into place one day? Certainly.
It stems from an announcement last June. The NHL decided to discontinue the use of themed warm-up jerseys after a handful of players refused to wear pride jerseys, some citing religious and cultural objections.
That's just become more of a distraction from really the essence of what the purpose of these nights are.
It's not just pride tape. Other on-ice displays like pink tape or pink hockey sticks for cancer initiatives or camouflage tape in support of military nights also won't continue.
There's been a lot of collateral damage in this discussion.
David Palumbo is with You Can Play, dedicated to LGBTQ plus inclusion in sport.
Unfortunately, I can't sit here and tell you that, a lot of this is because someone has expressed concern over using camo tape to express support for military families or refuses to wear a Hockey Fights Cancer jersey.
Many teams will still go ahead with their Pride Nights. Winnipeg's game will go next month.
The commitment, from an organization standpoint is we'll do everything we possibly can.
The NHL didn't respond to a request for comment, but has said many times in the past that it supports diversity and inclusion. Its players just won't be showing it on the ice. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Today is the deadline for Canada to get dozens of diplomats out of India. The Indian government issued the ultimatum last week, part of the response to Canadians' allegations that the Indian government was involved in the murder of a Sikh activist in Surrey in June. India ordered Canada to recall 41 diplomats from the High Commission in New Delhi. It has threatened to revoke diplomatic immunity for any extra staff who are not gone by the end of the day. Canada had 62 diplomats in the country. Some lower-level staffers stationed outside Delhi have now been relocated to Kuala Lumpur and Singapore over the last few weeks. Salad turnips, shishito, and garlic scapes. Maybe not the types of fall produce you're used to, but for this Japanese-Canadian farmer, they represent the harvest season. More on her farm and why it's so important after this.
Marilyn Thompson of Charlottetown has been through these doors more times than she wishes to count.
The nurses have been amazing, but there's not enough doctors. And there's not enough nurses. They're run off their feet.
Thompson previously suffered a stroke. Her husband has chronic health issues, and today her granddaughter was rushed in by ambulance. She worries about long wait times in the ER.
It's been horrific in regards to coming down here and having to wait upwards of 8, 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours to see a physician for sometimes very serious incidents.
This week, Health PEI advised because of high patient volumes, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital is over capacity, putting even more pressure on the ER.
We got to a point where we had what we call inpatients in the emergency department that are waiting beds in the hospital, up to at one point around 23 patients that were in the emergency department that were admitted waiting to get into the hospital. So that certainly is a bottleneck and can cause delays.
But Campbell stresses the emergency department is still capable of caring for the most sick, and those who need care should still come to the emergency department.
We do have good capacity to care for like the really emergency situations, but unfortunately, if a patient is not in a situation such as that and is less acute, the wait times will be quite long.
The hospital's emergency department sees on average upwards of 120 people a day. About 1/3 are considered less urgent cases that could be treated elsewhere. But Campbell acknowledges with limited walk-in clinics and so many people without a family doctor, sometimes the emergency department is the only place to go. The official opposition is calling for a contingency plan for capacity issues at the QEH.
It comes to no surprise to me, as we've been flagging this potential situation since the spring session, with the decision made by this government to close the ICU at Prince County Hospital, along with the extended closures now of Kings County Memorial Hospital ER on the weekends, along with the frequent closures at Western Hospital in Alberton.
Campbell says he does worry about long wait times and the impact it may have on those who have to wait hours to be seen in the ER. But he says patients are triaged and checked in on regularly. Wayne Thibodeau, CBC News, Charlottetown.
Hey, I'm Johanna Wagstaff.
And hi there, I'm Rohit Joseph.
And we're asking for 10 minutes of your day to go through the 10 things that the UN recommends we can all do when it comes to climate change.
Please don't leave.
No.
And also, the things aren't new.
We are just wired to not do them.
We promise you to help you figure out your brains, and you and your people can make better choices to combat climate change.
10 Minutes to Save the Planet is available now on CBC Listen and everywhere you get your podcasts.
October is the harvest month and a busy time for one Surrey farmer. As a child, Yuko Sudo's mother had trouble finding authentic Japanese ingredients to cook with. So Yuko started growing them herself. She now shares produce boxes with families while emphasizing ecological responsibility.
You only do farming because you're crazy. And you love it. Literally everything about a farm is difficult. It seems like sometimes everything is against you. Maybe you run out of water, maybe the weeds are just taking over the field. And sometimes it's just hot and it's really hard to work in that kind of environment. Because we don't use chemical pesticides and herbicides, that means everything is done by hand. We harvest by hand, we wash by hand, we pack by hand, and that takes a lot of work. At Brave Child Farms, our mission is to grow using ecologically responsible methods, but it goes really beyond that. It is about growing food that excites people, that is meaningful to people, and that's why we really focus on the Asian vegetables.
Is farming ever a consideration for a career?
No. So my mother was an instructor at a university. My father had an MBA. So we don't really have a farming background, but there was some desire, some need to grow vegetables. For my mother, when she came to Canada, she tried to grow a lot of these Japanese vegetables. That was really important to my mother, being able to try to feed us vegetables and dishes that were important to her culturally, to pass on some of that family tradition and family values. One of the difficulties of farming is we will start the farming season in February, and that means planting seeds, starting in the nursery. But we don't get paid till almost June. So for that 4-month period, as the farmer, we have to take on a lot of risk and obviously just not being paid for that time. A CSA program, also known as a community shared or community supported agricultural program, it's a mechanism where a farmer sells a share of the season to the community. And in exchange, we give them the bounty from the farm. But if we have a hard year, they understand they are sharing in that risk. It is a true partnership to make it work.
Today we have the last bits of the spring season and waiting for our favorite summer crops to pop by, like eggplants, tomatoes. I'm pretty excited for that.
The CSA started about 7 years ago, and currently we are working for the past 3 years with Brave Child Farms in growing Asian greens. What we wanted to achieve was allow people to marry their interest in accessing local Asian vegetables with their interest in reaccessing and reaffirming some of their cultural practices.
Yo, I like your sick shirt. Is that a dino playing basketball?
For a lot of diasporic folks, food is the one daily gateway to accessing culture and also reminding people of home, reminding people of family, friends. My grandma and grandpa were farmers as well, and I think it's been kind of taught through the generations that we should move to, more white-collar jobs. So I think there has been that push from many of our parents to not go into farming.
I was really surprised when I told my mom that I wanted to go into farming because she was so supportive. She said that she wanted me to be happy, and she could see why that would make me happy. Because ever since I was a kid, I always loved growing things. I think the saddest thing for me is that she never got to see this farm. She wanted to come to the farm and she wanted to help out at the farm, but she never got a chance to because she passed away. Whenever I took the vegetables to her, she would call me weeks after saying how delicious the eggplant was or how long the cucumbers lasted and all the things she'd do with it. Getting into farming is easy. Starting a farm is, I think, easy. What's really hard is to continue to farm. I started the farm as almost a hobby, but it grew into something more meaningful. And what's amazing is that it's not just meaningful to me, it's meaningful to so many people because it resonates with something in them, whether it's because they have children and they want to share that vegetable with them, or maybe they're homesick and something about that vegetable gives them the comfort that they're looking for. It's definitely grown into something much, much bigger than I ever dreamed possible.
Hard to see it at the grocery store, right, Darius? When you pick up whatever you want and you think, how did it get here? And now we know. Always a good reminder.
It is, yeah, and a good reminder of how difficult this year has been because of the drought situation, the fires, just everything for farmers around the province and across the country. Not a great year. Right now we're returning to seasonal. We have come down a little bit, so we're around where we would normally be this time of year for most places. Up north, we're still a little bit above seasonal, up to 5 degrees or so in some places. Those temperatures are expected to come down. We are expected to come up, actually, here in the south and heading into the end of this week as some of that, a new high-pressure system sets up across BC. This one going to be short-lived, though. We saw that rain starting to move in again this weekend, so expect temperatures to start to rise, especially on the coast over the next few days, and then start to come down this weekend. So we only look to Friday here. That's where our temperatures are likely to peak, coming down again on Saturday.
For the interior, temperatures stay pretty similar to where they are now, maybe come up a few degrees. That rain that's coming this weekend probably not going to make its way into the interior, so temperatures here will be a little bit more stable than the sort of up and down that we've been having here on the coast. But for tonight, again, pretty much around where we'd normally be this time of year. For most of the province, we're looking at some rain petering out tonight. So most of these places where we see those rain showers right now, that's a low chance that we're going to get that rain. So just scattered showers really across the south. Tomorrow, if we looked at tomorrow, that rain for the northeast, a little bit more certain. So that's where we're most likely to see rain tomorrow. A few just, again, passing through the southern parts of the province tomorrow. But for the most part, we're looking at clearing skies as we head into the end of the day tomorrow and into the end of this week. And then it's not until this weekend that our chance of rain returns, not just here in Vancouver, but all along the coast, and potentially seeing those showers work their way into the interior. But just expect temperatures inland to be a little bit higher over the next few days than they are by the water, just as it usually is when we have a little bit more of that sunshine.
Now, you've got some science news to share about clouds, which apparently are pretty involved in rain.
Yeah, you're so right, Dan. Brilliant.
Finger on the pulse.
Yes, I have to say I'm a little bit of a cloud nerd. So this graphic comes from the weather company, and it's just showing you a bunch of different kinds of clouds. Now, high, mid, low, we can see clouds all over the sky. I once had a friend tell me that they couldn't tell how high up a cloud was, which I thought was insane. It's so obvious if you look at a cloud if it's close to the ground. Anyway, I digress. Today I want to talk about cumulus clouds. These are the big white puffy ones that you see often in the sky. The sort of prototypical cloud, the one that a child would draw if they were drawing a photo of a cloud. And so here's a photo I took at Jericho just a couple months ago. You can see this big puffy cloud. Now, Dan, I want you to guess how much this cloud weighs. It's let's say it's around 1 kilometer cubed in size.
342 pounds.
342 pounds. Honestly, that's pretty similar to what I would have guessed. Pretty light. It's not. That cloud would weigh, if it was that size, 1.1 million pounds.
Now you're just scaring us, man.
Right?
And they float above us.
And they float. The dry air around it is heavier than the cloud itself, the wet air in the cloud. But yeah, clouds are really just water vapor, made up a lot of water vapor, and water is heavy. And it turns out clouds are a lot heavier than I would have expected. So that's your science news of the day.
You are going to learn something every day on this newscast, everybody. And Darius will take us on the journey. Clouds and all.
Clouds and all. Thanks, Dan.
After the break, we take a look at a new documentary celebrating a Canadian icon. You'll want to see this?
This used to be the kitchen, but like everything else, it is completely gutted.
Natasha Hatchard Pemberton had 3 feet of storm and sewer water in her basement the night of July 21st. It ruined everything, including her 2 teenagers' bedrooms. She and her family had to buy hazmat suits to clean up and gut the place themselves.
My hair has been falling out. That's how stressed I am. I have been physically sick to my stomach.
Her insurance will cover $50,000, but that's not enough. So she's applying for the province's Disaster Financial Assistance Program, which could cover up to $200,000 of uninsurable losses. For that coverage, a cost estimate needs to be submitted, and it was only last week she and her insurance provider were able to find a contractor. This is over 70 days after the flood.
We are still seeing shortfalls in workforce availability, which of course then combining the supply chain issues with the workforce supply does put additional pressure on projects.
I'm at a hurry up and wait situation, and I'm being told from my insurance company that all of the companies they contract and deal with are overwhelmed and can't do it.
Ashley Lushman is in a similar position. Her entire basement was destroyed, but her insurance claim was completely denied, so she's also applying for the provincial relief. She's still struggling to find a contractor.
We'll just have to, I don't know, we'll do a little bit at a time. It might take a few years to get it all put back together and pay it off while we can.
For Hatchard Pemberton, she's running out of patience for what she describes as an extremely frustrating process. A spokesperson for the province's Emergency Management Office told CBC in a statement that homeowners can submit their applications for the Disaster Relief Fund without a quote for repairs for now. This is so they can meet the October 31st application deadline. Then they can submit the cost estimate after the fact, once they find a contractor. As of Thursday, 700 applications have been submitted. Selena Alders, CBC News, Halifax.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
The Chutzpah Festival returns November 2nd to 23rd with an exciting lineup of performances, including dance, music, theater, and more. For tickets, visit chutzpahfestival.com and join CBC Vancouver's Leanne Young at the Alumni UBC Achievement Awards November 14th. The event honors members of the UBC community through their endeavors and commitment to help shape a better world.
He was a beloved entertainer whose TV show was regular viewing for many children in Canada, including yours truly. Ernie Coombs was the man behind Mr. Dressup here on CBC. Eli Glasner has more in the documentary about his life and legacy.
Maybe you remember the music or the tickle trunk.
Oh, here's an interesting one.
If you're Canadian and a certain age, there's a good chance you spent a good part of your childhood with this guy.
Oh, would you like to have an airplane ride with me?
He was Ernie Coombs to his family, but for over 30 years, Mr. Dressup taught us how to make crafts and care.
Oh.
Coombs died in 2001, but a new documentary has him back on our screens with some surprising revelations.
Most people don't even realize that they were very close friends.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood.
Coombs first met Fred Rogers working on his kids' show in the U.S. When the CBC hired Rogers to create a Mr. Rogers prototype, there was only one man who shared his vision.
It was a philosophy they shared. Fred Rogers chose Ernie very specifically to come to Canada.
I remember Dad telling us that.
Coombs' daughter says Fred Rogers inspired Dressup's direct style.
Fred told him to look at the camera as a child. That's the child that you're speaking to. It's not an audience, it's a child.
Well, that was an amazing gift. Thanks very much, Granny.
Oh, you're welcome, Mr. Dressup.
Like many, the puppeteer for Granny was starstruck when they met.
I just remember staring at him.
She says as families are feeling this squeeze, she misses his approach.
Hey, you got some tape and a piece of paper, which, you know, most people do have, that you can create whole worlds with something that is not really elaborate.
I like to save these, you know.
Turn on a kid's show today, and it's more animation than arts and crafts.
It's cheaper to make and easier to sell around the world and dub in other languages. But then you also have something that isn't grounded in anything real.
More than just an outpouring of affection, the documentary is a reminder of what Ernie Coombs left behind.
We can all choose to slow down, take the time, build something simple, just be present.
Now, you know, we've got to be going along, so...
Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
It's bye-bye from...
Mr. Dressup!
Bye!
Finally, a little bit of Canadian broadcasting history has gone silent. The longest-running segment on CBC Radio went off the air yesterday.
The National Research Council official time signal. The beginning of the long dash indicates exactly 1 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time.
The National Research Council time signal was first heard on CBC Radio November 5th, 1939. It aired every day for 84 years. A CBC spokesperson says the expansion of CBC broadcasting on the internet and satellites can create delays, which led to concerns about the accuracy of the time signal. That is your that is your 6 o'clock newscast for tonight. Still getting used to that. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem as well as our free app and on YouTube. Tanya Fletcher is here at 11. Good night.